Oh boy, what a day. How about you? Everybody okay? I've had so many things going on, I can't hardly know where I am. When this didn't work immediately like I did last time, I thought, what have I done wrong? So, what we're going to do tonight, and I was trying to decide how to divide this up. We're going to have 4 sessions on eschatology, and I'm trying to think how to cover that. And so I spent time today not only, getting everything, but sort of thinking through um, that we're going to start off with the question of covenant and land and people before moving to the question of eschatological questions, prophetic questions. Because a lot don't realize this, but when you start talking about prophecy in the Bible, so much of it relates to the fact that God entered into human experience and existence to establish a relationship with human beings. And, uh, some people can't even work, they don't understand how even God came into the garden and talked to Adam and Eve. You have some new people, even some who are so-called evangelical now. They have been evangelical and now they're less so. I gave a paper at the ETS this year in Boston, Massachusetts on part of that problem. And um, the Bible is not in its beginning chapters, for example. It's not just a story like a mythical story in creation. It's actually an event that occurred, and Hebrew scholars almost in with few. I haven't seen hardly anybody disparage this. Hebrew scholars are mostly in agreement that what you see in the book of Genesis, what you see in that is actually uh, representing a historical narrative. That's how you would write. And it's a literal, it's not a mythical story like the Enuma Elish or some of the others in the ancient Near Eastern world. Now, I'm not going to go into all of that. All I'm saying is that we really have a historical account, and we're going to talk about something all the way back to Genesis 12. And I think it's a true historical account of what occurred. And and it's not because that you had a sonographer there. What you had was God who inspired individuals to write things. Now, if we don't believe that, we've got a long way to go in reference to understanding Scripture. And Jesus believed in it, the apostles believed in it, the early church and the ancient Jews. So I'm not sure why we today would say, well, it probably didn't really happen. It's probably a story written by someone along the way. I don't think that's what occurred. Um, so we're going to start, first of all, in the area of uh, moving to the question of God involved in history. We're going to talk about the development of covenant. We're going to move from there to the fact that God has a plan. Then we're going to move to issues of how do you interpret materials like this. And then we continue on to show examples that we will see this night, but also for the next 3 nights after this week, talking about the nature of God's activity in human existence. And see, the Bible presents God started it all off, but you know what? God also finishes it off. He starts with it and he ends with it. He's got a plan. And even though there was no one except God in eternity, he had a beginning. There are some who argue even today among some of what I call neo-evangelical now, and I don't know how they signed the Evangelical Theological Society statement and attend meetings, but they uh, they say that actually what you see in Genesis just couldn't happen. God would never walk among a bunch of people and talk to them. Really, read Genesis 18. Or say, well, you couldn't have a snake that would talk to Adam and Eve. Really? My goodness, read Numbers 22. You're just going to have to basically throw out the miracles of the Bible and all these things that God chooses to do. And you're reading just a funny book. So that's not where I'm at. I'm with the Apostle Paul and a few other people along the way who recognize that all Scripture is breathed out by God Himself and profitable for teaching, reproof, correction, instruction, and righteousness. And so we need to understand these things because actually, if there was no covenant with Abraham and that became Abraham, the great father to father of many nations, as the term is, um, we really couldn't put much confidence in the fact that God has a plan for the end of the world. Uh, one guy said in his writings that, well, you have light that's created before there's even a sun or moon, as though that's somehow big deal. When you read Revelation 21, it says that there's no more need for sun or moon because God is the light. What an idea that God can create light if He wants to. So I have no problem with Scripture in these things. So um, I think too many people have gotten connected to bad science. I won't go into all of that tonight. I've done work on that and written on it, but
isn't that the whole point, though? If you can, isn't that the whole point to their statements? If you can remove the miraculous from the Bible, then you're no longer held accountable to everything else in the Bible.
Pretty well true. Remember Bultmann? Everybody remember Bultmann? You read Bultmann? I'm joking with you. I'm probably none, hardly any of you have, but I have. So Rudolf Bultmann continued to get worse and worse and worse because he kept saying, I've got to believe in science rather than the Bible. Now, I believe in science too, that which makes any sense. But I don't believe in science because some scientist says something's true. There's a statement out of George Vald, who's a well-known professor of biology at Harvard, who um, who actually got a Nobel Prize for his work. And he wrote, and he says, there's only two possibilities of the creation of the universe. He said, what is called irreducible. It's called, what is that term? I can't even remember it now. Help me out. It's a term that you can create out of nothing. And that was pretty well
Ex nihilo.
No, that's not the term. That's, I know what you're saying, but no, it's
irreducible complexity, something like that.
No, not yet. Irreducible complexity. Yes, that's what you're wanting. Yeah. Irreducible complexity. But see, that was all thrown out. You can't have nothing to start something. That's been discounted. Nothing cannot. Matter of fact, there's a song, "Nothing plus nothing equals what? Nothing." So when you have nothing, you can't create something out of it. So even the Greek philosophers, if you look at my study Bible, in chapter 1 of Genesis, I actually go into the thing, and I'm talking about my online one. I did the Nelson Study Bible too, but that's a few years back. I'm talking about my new one I have coming. But I deal with Greek philosophers and how they deal with it, and even they aren't that stupid. Greek philosophers said the uncreated cannot create. The nothing cannot create something. And this doesn't take a genius to understand. Anyway, this George Vald said that's one option. Said the only other option is God created the universe. He said, but I don't want to believe in God. So I will accept irreducible complexity. I'll accept that nothing creates something. No proof, you realize. Is that science? I don't think so.
No, that's faith.
Well, he has faith in science.
Yeah.
that nothing can produce something, which is stupid. So anyway, I say all of that to say it. You may just say, how's that relate to what we're talking about? It's the fact that we're going to look at activities of God, and God will be in charge of it all. We're talking about last things, right? God starts it off and God ends it, and everything in between. And I don't know to what degree any of you are familiar with the term dispensationalism. Anybody raise your hand? Let me see who it is. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. It's a system of thought that started several years ago, and I'll go into it later a little bit more. But I've just wrote through it. I think I wrote 120 pages so far called Biblical Covenantalism, which is actually an introduction to dispensationalism. Because I'm saying everything that God does, look, ultimately he's into a covenant with it. When he comes to Noah, he has a covenant, right? And when he comes to Moses, he has a covenant. When he comes to Abraham, he has a covenant. That is, God talks to people and says, you have proof from me. You have evidence from me. You have my word in certain areas. And we're going to look at the Abrahamic covenant because of that, because it's going to lead to the rest of the entire biblical world to the end of time. And we'll talk more about that. So if you can see this, I mentioned a statement from Cyrus the Great. This is a prophecy, actually, and you don't think much about this being from him. But he says, remember the former things of old. It relates to him. For I am God and there is no other. This is what God dealt with Cyrus. And I am God, there is no other. I am God, there's none like me. Declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things that are not yet done. Declaring, okay, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. Calling a bird from the prey, a prey from the east. And that's referring to Cyrus. That's what I'm saying. People are pretty well acknowledging that this statement refers to something that the guy isn't even born yet. And God has called him to do his bidding. So my counsel shall stand, I will do all my pleasure, calling his bird, the man who executes my counsel from a far country. Indeed, I have spoken it. I will also bring it to pass. I purpose it. I will also do it. Listen to me, you stubborn-hearted, who are far from righteousness. I bring my righteousness near, it shall not be far off. My salvation shall not linger, and I will place salvation in Zion for Israel, my glory. And the reason why much is made of this is that this guy wasn't in power. This guy wasn't even born at this time. God actually says, I have a certain person planned to come and do something for me. What had happened? They had gone into Babylonian captivity, right? Babylon came, Nebuchadnezzar and so forth, and they had taken the Jews into captivity, and they were also kept there for a while until Cyrus comes from Persia, and he takes over Babylon. And then when he takes over, Daniel, the prophet, is still connected to him at this point. He had done some things for Nebuchadnezzar, but Daniel is interaction with Cyrus, and he actually sends the people who want to go back to Israel, and even builds the temple area for them again. This is Cyrus the Great. So this is an example of prophetic statements. Are you with me? Okay, because God knew all of this before anything was going on. He knows it from when? When did God learn about this?
Eternity past.
He didn't.
Oh, eternity, yes.
Yeah.
See, time doesn't exist with God. He's an eternal being who doesn't begin anywhere, and he doesn't ever end. And we receive our eternality as believers because God is eternal. One day we will be in the same way. So this is an important statement of Cyrus that is in the Bible, demonstrating the fact of God in his prophetic interest. Now, we're going to look at a lot of prophecy because we're looking at the last things, eschatology, the study of the last. So we're going to run through this. Okay, follow along with me then. I've got this all set up to go. And I think I made a statement, just so you'll see this. Some of these slides are from me, some from Randall Price, some from Tommy Ice. These are friends of mine, and we sort of use each other's stuff. So if you see this, I'm not stealing. All right. Now, continuing on then, the concept of covenant, and that's what I want to emphasize to begin with. You make a deal with somebody, right? you say, if you do this, I'll do this. Do you go that, for example, when you buy something? I'll take this and I'll give you something replacement. We call it money, but it's an arrangement. And it's much more sophisticated today than it used to be. But you have covenants that are formed of various sorts. When you, for example, buy a house, you make a covenant. See, anytime you're involved in much dealing with cash and product, you make covenants. Now, not exactly like this, but notice the Abrahamic covenant in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. And God makes a covenant. He makes a land covenant, a seed covenant, and a blessing covenant. And these are found in Deuteronomy 30, 2 Samuel 7, and Jeremiah 31. And it's important about these covenants. I'm going to go to this passage in Genesis in just a moment, in chapter 12. And because these are covenants largely with the Jewish people. Now, why? Is because God chose out of the blue, just like, he comes to a guy called Abraham. Actually, he was called Abram at that time. And he said, I'm going to do something for you. I'm going to make you a great nation. See? And I'll make your name great, he said. And we know the name. But the name he made initially was from the man whose name was Abram, great father. That's what it means in Hebrew. And then he becomes Abraham because it becomes the father of nations. And so that's the things he's got to do. Now, Abraham was put into a bad slot sometimes because God, at one point, he says, I'm going to bring all this I'm talking to you about, and this mighty nation you're going to be, is going to come from the fact that you're going to have a son. And what happened to Abraham? Did he have a son?
Yeah, he went his own route and
He
had a
went his own
son.
way first, right?
Yeah.
Because his wife couldn't seem to bear a child. So he had a stand-in wife. Now, we don't do that today. I don't know, maybe some do. But a stand-in wife that he had sexual relations with and had a child through. Now, the problem is that child that came from Abraham has become a real problem, and his descendants have become a real problem in the world. Why are they a real problem? Douglas, why are they a problem? Who's the son ultimately of Abram that gave rise to a difficulty?
Ishmael, father of
Ishmael,
the Arabs.
of the Arabs, who eventually have become basically the Muslims. So you have the brother Ishmael and the brother Isaac, and they've been fighting ever since almost. So you have this Abraham covenant that relates to a land. He says, I'm going to give you a certain land. I was reading something today that the international community is upset about Israel beginning to take more land inside the West Bank area and in what is called Palestine. And so they're obviously doing wrong because they're not letting the Arabs have the land. Have you ever looked at the land that Arabs occupy in the Middle East? I mean, it is enormous. I mean, they have hundreds of millions of people. Israel has what, about 15 million, 16, 17, less than there. They had, before the Holocaust, they probably had about the same. It's taken them a while to grow a new group. But the Arabs occupy a tremendous amount of land as though they need more. And when the Arabs under Arafat initially with what is called the PLO tried to go into Jordan, a brother nation, the Jordanians are Arabs, tried to go in there, King Hussein sent his military and wiped them out. The international community didn't even blink an eye on that one. It's only because the Jews are doing it and trying to have a little piece of land out of a massive amount of land. You got to think about this. You can just put your finger on the map and then you can surround the map like this. the amount of land that the Arabs have. So they're all aggravated by Israel. I've got a little book I've been working on I may put out called The Myth of Palestine, because a lot of people just do not know the history of that place and what happened, because actually the so-called Palestinians initially were they were Philistines, but they also came from Greece, not any Arab place. And it was called Philistia because of, anybody know?
The
The Romans,
Philistines.
the Romans came in and changed Philistia to Palestine, Palestina in Latin, and they changed the name of Philistine to Palestinian, again using Latin. So they just changed the name because they came and took over the Israel for the Jews, the Romans did, in the first portion of the 2nd century under Hadrian. So that is not oftentimes understood, but the fact is they were not Arabs, they were Greeks. As a matter of fact, the Arabs did not come to Israel until the 7th century after Christ. So there were no Arabs there who sort of inhabited, and had this land until the Muslim invasion occurred at 7 centuries after Christ. You ever heard that on the news, by the way? They're sharing that good news, explaining history to you? No. Well, see, what I'm talking about actually has prophetic importance. You realize that? Because there's a fight still for the land of the Jews and the land given to them by God, and he promised it to them. And I want you to know something, they will get it eventually. It will be settled. But that's a prophetic issue. So they were promised a land, and that's what Abraham did. Remember what God said to Abraham when he brought him to this land? What did he say to him? Dylan, what did he say to him when he brought Abram into the land? He said, do something. You can't come up with it, that's fine. What about Damon?
I'm not sure off the top of my head.
To do something? Well,
What was Abram supposed to do?
circumcise all the males in his family.
Well, that's true, but in reference to the land.
In reference to the land.
If you don't get it, it's okay. He said to Abram, he said, walk throughout the land, and all the places you put your feet is the land I am giving you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Abram covered the whole land of what we call Israel today. And this is the land God promised them. That's just the way it is. And so Arabs coming in the 700 years after Christ cannot take the land that God gave to Israel. That's the point. So when you hear all this malarkey on the news talked by news people who probably never went to school or something, I find them to be ignorant. I was in politics for a while back in the 80s. I won't go into all that, but I was heavily involved in some political stuff, and I worked a couple of national state offices for people, different things. But I found it almost impossible to get the news people to write it correctly. I started handing to them my comments so they could know what to put down, because apparently they couldn't write it themselves. So I don't have a whole lot of confidence in them. So Abram, go throughout the land, because what we go to is what's yours for your people and your posterity. So it's their land. That's the point. As far as God's concerned. Now, one day he'll be doing something to enforce that, but that's not God's plan at this juncture. It's a land covenant. That's the first thing I want to point out to you. Land. Second, it's a Davidic covenant. Why do they call it a Davidic covenant?
Because God reestablished that with David.
Yeah, he established it with David, but what was he going to do what was David going to be? He's the seed. Remember, Jesus came from the lineage of David. There were other Jews. He came from the lineage of David. Why David? Because David was the king which would form the entity that Messiah would have. So remember, David was from Bethlehem, and he became the king, taking over from a king who was really pretty bad. And God promised that your seed will ultimately be the seed of Messiah, the anointed one, the one that comes from God. And that's exactly what happened. A Davidic covenant, according to 2 Samuel 7, seed. The third part of the covenant is a new covenant, which is interesting. This is a covenant that Paul relies on, Paul the Apostle relies on in Galatians chapter 3. If you read Galatians chapter 3, this is what Paul relies on when he interprets. He said that Jesus came from the lineage of what? Of David. And say he is the one, and what he does is that we then, and we participate in Jesus, we participate in God's promises. It's a new covenant, a covenant of blessing. This is actually, remember, the covenant was made with Israel, but through Jesus, from the line of David, from Jesus, we become part of him, and we then participate in the covenant, is what he gets to. Remember, he said there's neither male or female, there's neither Jew or Greek, neither rich or poor, whatever you want to add to it. The promise that we receive as Christians is a promise to the nations. If you'll read this passage in Genesis 8 and also go into Jeremiah 31, you'll see that God was not only going to give it to Jews, but all those who associated with Messiah himself. Jeremiah 31. So this is you see why I'm taking all of you into this? It's prophetic. And this is the big deal. God's big plan with Abraham ultimately comes to us as Gentiles who are not Jews. But there's neither Jew nor Greek in reference to what Christ has done. There is Jew and Greek in reference to the physical people, but not in reference to participation with Christ as our brother, if you want to put it that way, or a savior. So that's important. Put a thing here at the bottom. Gentiles are the blessing through Christ, the seed. So that's important to know. Now, the covenant itself, you have different kinds of covenants. If you work in the area of buying houses or things like that, if you work in law and such like that, you usually make bilateral covenants. I do this and you do this, right? I'll give you money, you give me that. You give me the hamburger, whatever. See, we're making a deal. Matter of fact, there used to be a program on there. I may still be there, I don't know, but a program on television called "Let's Make a Deal." And so a lot of people view that maybe Abraham and God made a deal, but actually they didn't. God said to Abraham, "I'm going to do something, and it has nothing to do with whether you come through or not. I'm doing it by myself. It's unilateral, and it's also unconditional." Think about the terms. Unilateral means it was not shaked on. God said, "I'm just going to do it." That's the deal. And it's unconditional. It does not depend upon whether you came through or not. Now, Abraham is known by one who came by faith, right? Paul speaks about that. Abraham's acts, those acts are counted as faith to him. That is, he came through. Now, if Abraham had not taken Isaac to the mountain Moriah, which I'm going to show you pictures of in a little bit, if he had not gone to Mount Moriah, then and really said he was going to put through what God told him to do, God counted it to him as righteousness, as faith. Because actually God said, I wanted to see you do what I said. Now, God knows two kinds of ways in Hebrew. He knows intellectually. In other words, God knows every single thing that's going to happen on the earth. Did God know that Abraham was going to come through with his obedience? Sure, he knew it from eternity. But he did not know it in the Yada way. If you know some Hebrew, it's Yada. The fact is, he knows it experientially. He knew what was going to take place from eternity. God did. But it's in time and space that he knew it in relationship and experience with Abram. And that's what you have. That's why you have that particular Hebrew word used. God provided a sacrifice, as we know. What's interesting that Abram also believed something, because Abraham did continue to believe God. Remember what he said to the servant who helped them bring the stuff up for the offering? Because you had to put fire, you had to have, what do you call that? Kindling of a sort, a small wood, and put it and do the thing, because he was going to have a sacrifice. He told the servant, he says, my son and I, we will return after we do this. How could he say that? He's about to go kill him. So he doesn't know what's going on, but he knows God. And God wants to see him do it, which he doesn't do because he wasn't planning it that way. Are you following me on anything? Is that okay? That's what's happening. That becomes important. That place, Mount Moriah, I think, is the location of the rock in which ultimately the Jews built on the temple. Remember that Melchizedek, he was the high priest of God in Jerusalem before there was a Jerusalem. You know this in the Bible? Have you read this before? I hope. Read Hebrews, you'll read it. The fact is, Melchizedek was the priest of God. You couldn't, in Israel, it was a big deal. You had to have a certain kind of priest. You had priests that were of certain tribes and certain responsibilities. You had some certain kinds of priests. But Melchizedek was none of those priests. He was a unique priest at that place, probably the place at which Abraham was to offer his son. Also the place to which the temple was built on and the rock is built. And I want to show that to you in just a minute where you can see it. But you have all this stuff in the background that we're going to talk about prophecy and all this kind of stuff, but it makes no sense unless you have these foundations to it. God is not just making prophetic statements about Cyrus. This is all decided long ago in eternity. And God always accomplishes everything he says he's going to do. So these covenants are so important. And the fact is that we are participating. We are not Jews. Don't let anybody tell you that you're a Jew now. And the church is actually Israel. The church is not Israel, and you're not a Jew. Unless you are a Jew. If you're a Jew, that's fine. But if you're a Jew, like my wife has Jewish blood, and in her family from Russia, and where they're from, lots of Jewish people were there. So she actually, when we were at we were in Israel together once, and when we first went there, and she was at I'm trying to think of the place. I can't think of it right now, but it's a Holocaust museum there. Okay, it's a museum in a Jerusalem museum, or maybe they call it just a Hebrew museum. Anyway, there's a place that you can look up your relatives. Remember what happened, that they had a record of all these people? It's called the Holocaust. And many, 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 many Jewish people were put to death because people, even in Eastern countries in Europe who are complaining about Israel today and saying how unfair they are not letting these terrorists have their place, Jews have said, we're done with it. No more. We're not going to have this anymore. You know, after they did that thing and kill those 1,000 something innocent people listening in a concert, Israel said, we're done with it. They're not going to have anything there. We're taking over. And I don't blame them. So, but in the Holocaust Museum, they have records of people, and you can actually identify names and participate and associations with people there. So, so she found actually some people that she knew from her heritage. Now, uh, Galatians 3, in a way, becomes the fulfillment of the new covenant that's spoken about between Abraham and Yahweh himself. Now, we're going to take you and show you something that you probably haven't seen. And it took me a long time to find one of these examples. Just a few years ago, I finally ran across something. But here it is. See what this is? Can you see that? In sacrifice, you know, they always used an animal in Israel and other places too. They would shed blood. And that's why even Jesus is the ultimate sacrifice. He's a human who shed blood. This goes back to Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. I think it's 3:15, where God told basically Satan that he would basically have a minor injury on the one of his promise, but he would crush the head of Satan. And he did at Calvary. But here's something that a lot of people miss. I was trying to figure out how to illustrate this. See, you could cut an animal in half and have the head on one side and the back on the other, you know, the tail on the other, so to speak, cut in half. But what they did in this thing is they actually cut the animal this way. Now, watch me. It's just going right down the center, so two halves that are identical. Now, why is the significance of that? It's because that what God has done here is done what was known in the ancient world as a unilateral contract. And the theory is, I'm going to do this, but you know, you're gonna be responsible to go ahead and accept this, and that's what he did. But it's what happened here. Abram in this normal situation would have had to do this with the guy he's making a deal with. You got my point? They would have two guys make a deal. They cut the animal in half, and that says, if either of us breaks the covenant, this is how they used to do it, then you're going to look like the animal when I come to see you. But see, God did this by himself. Abram's asleep. That's why I say it's a unilateral covenant. It's not bilateral where two guys make a deal and they cut the animals in half. Go back and read the passage in Genesis 15. If you let's see, show you something here. Let's see, where is that? Let's see. Let me find it here so I can. And we're going to go to here. In case you don't know what this is. Let me see if I can get back to it. Yeah, here we are. I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, but I'll go ahead and advertise it. But I thought this is the best way to read the Bible with you. This is the new online study Bible I did. It's never ever been done before. I've got a guy who sent me a notice that I've worked for years in the area of Bible study tools on the internet. He says there's not a single one of the top 100 I checked that does anything even close to what you've done. So I feel pretty good about that. But the passage I wanted to look at here with you, can you see that okay?
Yeah, we can see it.
Anybody still awake? Okay, good. So what we're going to do though is we're going to go and get in here and we're going to resume reading. And what's the passage I gave you? Genesis 12, what?
15. Genesis 15.
Okay, let's take a look at the Genesis 15. What's this? I don't know. Oh, I think that's the thing with, yeah, okay. Let's see, Genesis 15.
Like verse 10.
Okay, here it is, 15, verse 10. Here we got it. Oh, I've got it in here even. Verse 12. When the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram. Now terror and great darkness fell on him. Can you read this okay?
Yeah.
He said to Abram, know for sure that you know for sure. See the words, know for sure. It's a certainty that your offspring will live as foreigners in a land that is not theirs and will serve them. They will afflict them for 400 years. Huh, interesting. And I will judge that nation whom they serve afterward. They will come out with great wealth. What's he talking about here, by the way? This is said in Genesis to Abram before there ever was the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay. But you will go, see, after they'll come out with great wealth. See, you'll come out to your fathers in peace, you'll be buried. And fourth generation, they will come again, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet full, and so forth and so on. He's talking about the captivity in
Egypt.
And the Exodus. This is said way before that period of time. Same kind of thing like with Cyrus, 100 years before he was even doing anything. God says, I already know the future, and this is the way it's going to be. And so when you look here in the fourth generation, it came to pass when the sun went down and was dark, behold, a smoking furnace and a flaming torch passed between these pieces. In that day, Yahweh made a covenant with Abram, saying, I've given you this land to your offspring, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates, the land of all these people here. Now, that's what God said he was going to do. And here, for example, if you were looking at this, you'd click it, and there you'd have it. This is the example. It's a very good, it's a way to put it together. I explain it here. You cut it in half, but it was different. Abram was not a dual handshaker. He's asleep. And God says, I'm making the covenant. It's unilateral. That's the reason I want to make that point with you. Okay, any questions on that? Okay, well, let's keep moving then. Let's see, I guess I want to get to Jesus here later. All right, let's move here. We've already covered this. Now, let's look at this for a moment. This is showing God's covenant with Israel, and I keep emphasizing this because this is the foundation of the whole discussion on biblical prophecy and the issues of Israel and the church, and all these things come from this initial contact with Abram. Now, notice here, God's covenant, their promises made, promises fulfilled. Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 12, we talked about that. Genesis 15 is also what we just looked at with the animals. The land of Israel covenant is in Deuteronomy 30. The Mosaic Law Code is Exodus 20 and Galatians 3. So these are all covenants of various sorts that are made. There's a Davidic covenant, and there's also a new covenant. You notice all these, and they all are related in some way to ultimately the final covenant God made. And that's with Christ as a final offering for sins. And had Christ not died, according to Paul, what would have happened? Anybody know Romans 5?
Well, yeah, if Christ is not raised, then neither are we.
Well,
We're just talking
Romans
about if
5
he didn't
goes,
die.
okay, now you're getting to it. First of all, Paul says something about in Adam, everybody
Dies.
died, even Abraham and Adam. We sinned in Adam. You may not think you did, but you did because you're part of the human race. But in Christ, we're all made alive. All those who believe in Jesus are made alive. And that's the key. Sin came into the world. Christ has made a sacrifice for sins. And that's what all these things that we're talking about are going from. Without Jesus ultimately making the sacrifice, All the efforts will be wasted. But anyway, here you have the Mosaic Law Code. That's the covenant at Sinai, the land of Israel covenant, Deuteronomy 30. God says, listen, he said the covenant is a permanent, unilateral, unconditional covenant. But guess what? If you're disobedient, I'm going to give you a spanking. He didn't say exactly those words. But if you're obedient, I'm going to give you blessing. And so in Israel, what it meant was this. And God went on to explain it in Deuteronomy. He says, I'm going to bring plenty to you. You're going to have all your crops. Everything's going to be going great. You're not going to be persecuted by any nation. You'll be, you'll not have anybody conquer you, and on and on. And then he says, however, if you disobey, you're going to have locusts come and eat your crops. You're going to have drought. You're going to have armies take you over. You're going to have all these things. If you do what I say, you'll have blessing. If you don't do what I say, you'll have cursing. By the way, do not read Galatians 3 in some translations of the Bible. Actually, there's only one statement there. Actually, there's another one I don't agree with either. So Paul talks about the Israel of God means the church is Israel, which is a bunch of nonsense. But in chapter 1 of Galatians, you have him saying that if you preach anything else than what I say to you, and some translations say you'll be condemned eternally to hell. That's not what the passage says. It said it will be a curse. To Jews, a curse was not burning in hell. To Jews, a curse was God giving you a good spanking. And I say it's sort of like this. Let's say you had a son or a daughter, and let's say you bought a bicycle for one of them. And they're riding their bicycle, and it's their bicycle, and they're enjoying it. And then they disobey, let's say, their dad regarding what they should be doing. He says, okay, I'm going to take away the bicycle from you for 2 weeks because you did this. It's still your bike, but you can't have use of it. That's what God did with the Israelites. It's not as though he forsook them. Matter of fact, he said that as long as there are stars in the heavens, my covenant will remain with you. Anybody notice all the stars going away yet? No? No stars?
No.
Okay. That means God still is going to keep his covenant with Israel. He will keep them as long as there's time. He's going to follow through. He's just going to. So that's what we've got here. And of course, in the middle of all this, you've got these various other kinds of things where you have the formation of Israel. You can read these and sort of learn from them. Restoration. That's not spelled right, is it? Restore. Oh my goodness, the T goes over here. Wrong place. Restore, restoration. Spell wrong. Church and kingdom. So all these realities relate to these covenants. Okay? Any questions on those? I think I can show you. I wonder if I've got that. Where do I have that? I think I can show you even the mound. I think I've got a copy here somewhere. Let me see. Where do I have that? I thought I had it here somewhere. I'm going to check real quick. Well, I've got to have that somewhere. Oh, here I got it. Oh, there you are. I'm going to take it over to the other side here where you can see it. Remember I mentioned that Melchizedek was high priest in Jerusalem, and the place that Isaac would have been sacrificed, or as he wasn't really sacrificed, but he was put there to sacrifice. This is the rock that's inside the Dome of the Rock. I've got another one which is from the top. I'm not sure where that is. Oh yeah, here's another one from the top. I'll put that over here. This is where the Ark of the Covenant was, and a guy by the name of Alan I think it's Alan, but anyway, it's Rittmeyer is his last name. he's done investigation of this for years. He did his PhD at Hebrew University in these studies, and he was able to find the place that probably the Ark of the Covenant set on top of this rock, which is probably where Melchizedek, was in charge, and also God probably had Abram to come with Isaac, probably. And so there's something here, at least in reference to the um, the Ark of the Covenant. Here you go. Can you see that? Okay. Now, if you will look here, I think it's right here. I took this picture, I think, or one similar to it, if it's not this one. And he found that you could have put the ark in a location because the priest every year, one time a year, they would come in and sacrifice behind the Holy of Holies, and they would come in there and they would do their sacrifice at the ark. Well, this is where it all occurred, most likely, because where the Dome of the Rock is probably, almost without any question. Some people have tried to make an argument of two other places, but they really don't stand up to scrutiny. That this is the place that the ark set, and the Holy of Holies was prayed at the time. So, okay, have you ever seen that?
No.
Okay. Well, it was a dangerous thing to come in there, except one time a year, with a priest came in. Yeah. Anyway, that's the Dome of the Rock, rock from above. I'll close that now. And this is from the side. Now, I remember taking this exactly, but I think I sort of stood up and I was able to get down on it, but I can't find that picture. This is another one I found. Okay. Now, in all this time I've said a lot. Can I see if there's any questions?
Maybe not to do with this covenant or these covenants, but did you say that there are people that believe the temple was in a different location, or just that the ark sat somewhere else on top of that mount?
Well, there are people who want to have a temple built,
Yeah.
and they can't seem to get the Arabs, the Muslims, to destroy that one, the Dome of the Rock. So they want to put a temple up, see, and that has part of it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a place called the Well of the Spirits, which is if you were in Jerusalem and you're looking at the Dome of the Rock, you'd be looking toward the west. So you would look west, and then you would look because that is south. You'd be looking northwest up toward the a well of the spirits, they call it. And they said that may have been an alternative place. There's nothing much going for that. Another guy has argued, and some evangelicals bought into this, but there's not a shred of evidence for it, is that the ark or the dome of the temple was built between David's city and the palace.
Mm.
So if you were to go south from the Temple Mount, I'm just thinking it through my head, south through the temple and go down. By the way, they've now opened up the whole thing. You can go under the ground like the Jews used to go, coming from the David's temple. You can go underground all the way up to the time you get to the mikveh, the baptismal pools there, and into the southern entrance to the Temple Mount. Okay, now some have said you got the palace here, which is right across the street from the where all the baptismal places are, and so you have the palace up there, and then you go down a ways before you get to the what we call David's City. It's hard to explain this unless you were looking at it, but it's a hump that goes all the way down to the Pool of Siloam at the bottom of people, where the man who was blind, was healed and so forth.
Yeah.
At the very bottom of the hill. But they would have had so little room in that little place to have a temple, but there's never been any serious archaeological evidence of any of it. They're just trying to find a place.
Yeah. Well, if any of those places were legitimate, wouldn't the Jewish people have already rebuilt the temple by now?
Well, you would think so, but yeah, with the dome there, it's hard though. I
Yeah.
always wondered if Gaddafi, or not Gaddafi, who's that guy up in Iran? They were shooting missiles all the time. If one were to stray and hit the dome of the rock, that would solve the problem.
Oh man.
Well, I'm not advocating that, but I'm saying that that'd be, if a missile could go astray and hit something, that'd be the place. But the point of it is, the dome was built hundreds of years after the time of the time of Jesus.
Mhm.
And remember, the Muslims, I said, came in the 7th century
Yeah.
into the land. There were none in there before then. So, of course, there was no Islam before the 7th century either.
Right.
But that's when the Arabs began to take their strategy of to gradually take over nation after nation after nation. They've done it since the 7th century. And so when you wonder what's going on in reference to even Muslims being so many places now, they have learned, they multiply families very fast since you can have multiple wives, and they have strategy of gradually taking over. And when they take over from people that are not very smart, who think that we'll just be nice. Of course, after the Muslims take over, they'll not be nice. I saw that you saw that last week or two ago. A 16-year-old boy
Oh yeah.
was playing some music during prayer time, and they took him out and they cut his head off.
Yeah.
They don't always agree with things they don't like, and they're very, very dangerous, very dangerous. But they've gradually taken over hundreds of years. They've been moving through, so it's amazing. Anyway, okay, let's move on. So we have the new covenant relates to the church and the kingdom, which is not Israel per se. That's the new covenant. That's through you, the nations of the nations of the Gentiles, the nations of the earth will be blessed. So we are not getting the promises to Israel, but we are getting the promises of God that Gentiles also will be blessed. And that's what we learn out of this. You with me? Well, I haven't gone very far in view of the timing, so we're going to start making more time now. Now, let me say something about interpretation. If you're going to interpret prophecy correctly, and that's what we're going to do, you need to follow proper interpretive methods. My area of interest in my doctoral studies was in hermeneutics. Anybody know what hermeneutics means? Oh, good. Interpretation, right? Yeah, it's from a Greek word, actually Hermes, a messenger of the gods who talked and gave information. But hermeneutics is how to interpret things. And that's a big issue sometimes. And I put a big book out with it on, if you ever want to find it, by myself and a man with the name of Wheeler or Weiler. Now, how do you go about interpreting something? Because you're going to have to deal with prophecy. People come out with all sorts of interpretations of prophecy. My old professor, Greek professor at Hardin Simmons, was amillennial, and he believed most everything in the book of Revelation was just, everything was figurative about something else. None of the things that happened were really talking about things that would happen. They were teaching lessons to people, but not events that occurred. I don't think that's what the Bible does. I think the Bible's talking about real live things that will occur. And so literal means according to the letter, and thus is textual interpretation. People get them say, oh, I don't believe the Bible's literal because, an interpretation, because they think there's some kind of crazy thing that comes out because of what a figure of speech has. But see, literal means according to the letter. That is, you're paying attention to what really would be a normal way to read it. It doesn't deal with genre. It deals with the way in which you approach a text. So, according to the letter, textual interpretation. Understand a text according to what's written. Israel in the Bible means, guess what? Israel. The church means the church. It's not that hard. And yet you have some people trying to make the church Israel. Okay? So that's a problem. Two senses literal, you have figures of speech in reference to literal. You have what is called the plain literal, which is called denotation, denotative, okay? Denotative versus connotative. Denotation and connotation. Figure of speech and plain literal. That's what we mean by this. So actually literal, if you interpret a scripture or anything that's figurative, if you interpret it correctly, you've had a literal interpretation. Okay? Literal, he died. Figurative, he kicked the bucket. Guess what? In both situations, we know he got killed or he died in some way that way. Any questions? I want you to be sure and be ready to ask them. Anything there? Golden rule of interpretation. When this plain sense of Scripture makes common sense, seek no other sense, lest it be nonsense. I'll add that in there. See, when this plain sense of Scripture makes common sense, seek no other sense. Because if you do, you're going to come out with something quite different from what the text means. Take every word at its primary, ordinary, usual, literal meaning, unless the facts of the immediate context, studied in the light of related passages and axiomatic and fundamental truths, indicate clearly otherwise. Memorize that. So the fact is, we need to interpret Scripture literally. What makes sense based on whatever figures of speech are being used. For example, when I read a parable, I know that the parable is talking about something that's true to life that people recognize as events that actually occur, but I'm using that to teach a lesson, not that I think that thing actually did occur. So it's a different way of looking at it. Any questions? Rebuttals? I'm going to start grading. Just a second. I'm going to get my pen and start grading everybody. Okay. Yes, sir.
What about the idea of what's the word? Like the type of literature you're dealing with. For instance, you're not going to interpret like Revelation, the apocryphal form of literature is like really. And if I took it literal, it
Remember
seems
what
like
we
that
said?
can't quite be exactly right.
I'm talking about literal meaning includes figurative expressions, but it also includes non-figurative. Literal. Literal means to follow it according to the normal way you understand it. For example, in the book of Revelation, when John writes to the seven churches, when he speaks to them, do you think he's speaking literally or figuratively?
That's what I mean. I think in that case, I don't know. I can see it being either way.
Well, he talked about the church at Ephesus, and he gives certain remarks regarding Ephesus. Was he speaking literally or figuratively?
I think he was speaking literally then.
Yes, he's not using a figure of speech. It's literal.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, if he were to make a statement, for example, regarding, he said, "You're lukewarm," he's going to spit you out of his mouth. You think he's making a literal statement or a figurative statement?
Yeah, I think that's symbolic of something.
That's probably figurative.
Right.
Yeah. But it could be literal since they had water, but he's using the water discussion to talk about how they're acting. See, so you got to look and see what is the person trying to get over in that context. Okay?
That's what I mean. I mean, so some of those visions that John is describing, I don't understand how literally interpreting it really makes sense.
Well, for example, if Jesus says, "I am the you're the sheep and I'm the shepherd. Is he talking about a real sheep, or is he talking about
Yeah, it's a metaphor.
it's a
Obviously.
metaphor, so it's a figurative,
Like when he
right?
says, "I'm the door," obviously he's not made of wood.
That's true, but everybody would understand what a door is and what it does. So
Mhm.
there you have a non. It is literal. It's a literal statement. I am the door. It doesn't mean I'm a real door. It means that I'm really going to do something. I'm going to really open. I'm going to be open to you.
I guess that's where I messed up because for me, when I think of interpreting something literally, if somebody said I'm the door, I'm going to think, come on, man, you're not a door.
Yeah, but we know that if we have any sense, we can understand. But what does a door do? It's something that you can be accepted in or not accepted, so to speak, come in or not come in. And so Jesus is using the figure to express a real truth. That is, I'm the person that will actually be able to take care of you and help you if you'll come into me, so to speak. You'll come to me. So he's using a figure of speech to talk about a real happening.
Yeah, I mean, I get all that. I'm just saying, to me, when I think of saying I'm interpreting this literally, it's like if my wife says to me, and uses metaphors to try to explain something, and I'm like, just strictly thinking literal, we're not going to get through that discussion very well.
Well,
I've got to start thinking figurative. Oh, you're using an example. I get it. Okay.
Doug, I think if you use a different word, it just might be more helpful to you.
Yeah.
Use the word plain, a plain reading of scripture. Like that might get that idea of what literal is to you and change it a little bit.
yeah, you could use the words connotative and denotative if you want, but you can also for example, do you think that Genesis 1, when it said God said, "Let there be light," there was light, is that real light or not light?
Hmm. I mean, he is light.
Is it real light or just he's stating that he's opened the understanding of everything or something? See,
Oh,
you have evangelicals right now interpreting Genesis 1 to say these are not things that really happen. They're figures of speech. I have no problem with being real. Light is something that actually exists. And I think God can create it.
I guess like the hermeneutics class I took, they had a phrase. I can't. It's like the grammatical, historical. I
Yeah,
can't remember
grammatical,
the.
historical, and they usually say literal because we mean that we
Oh
want
yeah,
to.
but they always they had the caveat like you got to take in consideration what type of literature you're reading as well. Like poetry is going to be interpreted differently than a parable and
I agree. I
so forth.
agree. Well, poetry is a genre. Matter of fact, I gave a talk at the ETS in Boston here just a few weeks back, and I dealt with the question of uh, the understanding of figurative language and myth and parables and so forth, and how we approach these kinds of literature. You have to know what you're coming to, but you're still trying to get to a not a metaphorical meaning from it. You want to try to get a meaning that actually has a physical purpose. In other words, uh, when I say that God, for example, created the earth in, let's say, 6 days, I don't think that stands for something other than just 6 days. I mean, it's real 24-hour days as
Yeah,
we think of days. Others are saying, well, that doesn't make any sense. God doesn't do that. So it's just using the statement in a non-literal way. And this is pretty standard right now among some people within the so-called evangelical world. So I agree with you. I'm going to interpret things according to a normal reading of the words, whether it be
the way
figures
they
of
were
speech.
intended. I agree. There's only one meaning. Every verse has one intended meaning, and
Yes.
the way I've heard it explained, you could apply it thousands of ways, but there's only it was meant to mean one thing, and the context dictates, and the type of literature it is going to dictate what that meaning was meant to infer or convey.
Okay. Well, listen,
I don't
just
know.
get
That's
some
just
more thought to it. Just get some more thought. This is standard rule of interpretation. This is not something I just made up. The point of it is that literal means to make it in a term in a way that conforms to the reality of the event. And so sometimes that may though be a, for the one Isaiah, well, he just kicked the bucket. Do you think he really kicked a bucket?
right.
I was talking about he's died.
Right.
See, that's an example of using a literary form to state a non-literary happening.
Yeah, I'm not trying to argue. I'm just saying, what about that idea of taking into consideration the genre of literature you're dealing with?
So, yeah. But what is that other statement? There's so many statements oftentimes you read, and you're not trying to take it in a literal happening. You're trying to actually take something that is used to stand for an event. We use a word that's not really, we use a non-figurative statement. It's actually figurative, but we use it as though it were a non-figurative.
Mm-hmm.
Again, kick the bucket's an example. I can go out and kick buckets all I want, but I wouldn't know how to have died with any of them.
Right.
I don't think. So I'm just saying we have to pay attention to the words more carefully. That's what I'm getting at. Let's keep moving. I want to move to this. Now, if you're gonna study eschatology, you have to study the area of dispensations. Now, a lot of people don't like that terminology of dispensations because to them it brings a bad connotation. But dispensations a period of time in which certain things happen, and usually under some kind of guidance. I'm going to give you a dispensation to get your house payment paid in 2 months from now, or I close you out. Okay, that's a dispensation, a period of time in which a deal is made and something happens. Does that make sense? Yeah, everybody has to have their paper in within such and such a time, but I'll give you a dispensation of grace and give you an extra 3 days, kind of thing.
Amen.
Thank you. Do you understand me? Okay, now let's look at this together. There's eternity past and there's eternity future. You got that down? Now, there are several things that happen over the many thousands of years, and we don't know how many, but there's a time of innocence that the people who work in dispensational thought a time period in which certain things happen. That's what we're talking about, dispensation. When certain things happen, certain rules were established that are different from some other time possibly. And during that, it's a time of more innocence is the issue. See, that's why they name it that. So, for example, that's when creation was going on. And during this time, according to Genesis, there is a responsibility to obey God, right? Adam and Eve were given a responsibility. What was it?
Be fruitful and multiply.
Okay, made rulers of the earth, so to speak, right? Yeah. And they had certain responsibilities to tend to a certain job, right? Did they do real well? Probably for the first day or so, but not too long. Obey God. Did they fail? Yes. Disobedience. What came from it? A curse and death. So there's there's an explanation of the creation time when they had, first of all, innocence, when neither one was sinful to begin with. They hadn't committed any sins. Apparently the first sin was the yielding to Satan. As far as I know, there's nothing else connected. Then you had the time of conscience, which is the period of the fall. Uh, who actually killed someone at this period of time?
Cain,
Cain killed who?
his brother Abel.
Mm-hmm. And that obviously they were sinners already, correct?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So their activities, uh, they had responsibility offered to them to act a certain way, and they didn't. And why didn't they? Because they were sinners. That's part of it. And so you have the failure, which is wickedness and judgment. You have certain things. This is a time of innocence. What? Because you don't have firm rules of God down. You understand that? There are not a lot of rules like the Ten Commandments or something like that that was given in this period of time. And that's a period of the time when after the flood occurred. Because man was, and I use that in a generic sense, was into his own thing. He just naturally moved in the sinful way. But there were no laws. There was no Ten Commandments or anything. Okay? I think that's why they call it conscience. There's a blood sacrifice that's offered here because of the now blood has been spilled of a human sort. Wickedness. And then you have the flood. Now, the next period of time in human government is that you had something that occurred after the flood. You don't have you don't have actually a strong system of religious responsibility established then, do you? Because that really occurs when you get to the time of the Exodus and the Ten Commandments, the various laws of Israel. So you have periods of time in which certain things are happening in reference to the human race, and God is working with people at different stages of activity. So, you have the flood, and people sort of move away from the flood. I've had some friends that have spent quite a bit of money trying to find the ark, and I've tried to tell them. I said, first of all, which of the mountains of Ararat was it on? That's the first thing you got to determine. You could spend your whole life looking at the wrong place. That's the first issue. How do you figure out which one it is? Second, if you did find it, is it likely to actually have anything much there to look at? Because if you had 8 people, was it 8? Am I getting that right? 8 people? I think coming off an ark and you're forming a new community, you're going to have children. They're living several hundred years. And so they have children after children, and all these children, what are they doing for supplies? Probably what's on the ark. And they also, can you imagine if you want to build houses, you say, what are we going to build with? I got an idea. What about that piece of thing up there? It's not doing anybody any good. I suspect that ark was disassembled very quickly. So the ark. Then the Exodus came with the law, and of course now then you have the church age. These are all periods of time in which God has judged how people act and things that they do, and these are all called dispensations. Now there's a coming one after the tribulation period. We'll talk about that. That's going to be called the millennial reign. That's 1,000 years. Now, not everybody believes this is true. A lot of people are called millennialists. That is, they do not believe in a period of time like that. Scripture seems to define that 1,000-year period where Satan is released for a short time. And so you have that period between the coming of Christ for the church and finally for a judgment and eternal state that comes later. So these are all the various periods of the area of dispensationalism. If you want to have that and look at it, there you have it. Now, you have 3 basic things from You have eternity past we've talked about, but there's a time right now we call the church age. When does the church age cease?
Well, depending on what you believe, but for Calvary students, it's at the rapture.
Yeah. Yeah, we normally think that's the time of the rapture. But even if you were, let's say, post-trib, you have Christ coming sometime to get you. And you could still argue, since it's only 7 years, you could still argue for a millennial period. See? Because Christ eventually does come and he established his own Davidic kingship from Jerusalem. So, unless you want to argue directly, you go from the tribulation period into a eternal state. But I could see how either post-trib or pre-trib, either one or mid-trib, they could all accept a millennial period if they were to work it through. Because notice during the millennial period, you have Christians who now at that point will have a resurrected body, an incorruptible body, in which there's no aging and no decay and so forth. That over against the people, let's say, that made it through the tribulation period and are in the millennial period who are not that way, because there are people apparently that live for a long period of time, it says in the text, but they are not at this point, they don't have incorruptible, immortal bodies because they die, according to what it says in the tribulation, materials. Or I shouldn't say tribulation, in the post-tribulational materials. So you have the judgment seat of Christ going on in different places. That's not the great judgment over here. There's going to be a throne judgment, white throne judgment. So according to this view, is that Hades is still something very real, and you have 7 years of tribulation unless you're mid-trib or possibly, what do they have the other kind? They have the post-trib, and then you have some others who are another kind of trib. They're in the middle. But you have these periods of the time between the church age tribulation and millennium. Millennium's 1,000 years. Christ will be coming back here, the marriage supper of the Lamb. Now, theoretically, you could be post-trib and still argue that somehow you had some kind of going to be with Christ and coming back. I mean, there's ways to do that, but I would be pre-trib. Personally, there's reasons why. But during the tribulation period, a lot of really weird things are going on. But what's one thing interesting is that 12,000 Jews from each tribe will be given ability to go out and minister into the world, giving the gospel, and that they will be protected from being destroyed by the beast. So wherever you put that here, that's going on. Of course, the new heavens and new earth here, and that's eternity. I don't know if you ever give any thought to this. Sometimes I sit back and think, how would that be? After year after year after year after year after year, you keep living. I guess because you're not sinful, maybe. But I'm trying to think, would you get bored? I've lived 150,000 years now, and I'm doing well. It's sort of crazy to think about the concept of eternity.
We'll also have different bodies, though. And I mean, for us to think about eternity now, that's very limited based on how we experience life in these bodies and have our spiritual body. We have no way to understand that concept or what that might even be like to live with a spiritual body.
Yeah, that's true. 1 Corinthians 15, I always say that when I come back, I'll be better looking, but I don't know what's going to happen in that situation of the transformation that occurs. Well, listen, these are things that I just want you to be aware of. These are the different periods people argue. I'm not going to go into great length on that. We're going to go into the Olivet Discourse here in just a moment. That's sort of interesting. And we're not going to go into the rapture tonight. We're going to talk about the rapture and all those things next time. But I'm just sort of beginning some study of, of the subject area. I'm trying to go slow where I don't lose you. And if you want me to go faster, I can, but I'm just sort of taking time to talk about them. We're going to take about a 10-minute break or so, 10 to 12-minute break. And then you can grab a sandwich or whatever you need to do. And we'll be back here about 7:30 now. So we'll be back about 7:40, between 7:40 and 7:45. Okay. All right. Uh, uh. Okay. Oh, how's everyone? I'm dead. Been going pretty strong the last few days. Let's see, there's an example. I'm not really dead. Is weather gotten okay for you guys now? No massive blizzards or snow falls or anything?
It was 70 degrees out today.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super
Okay.
nice.
good.
I wouldn't mind a blizzard.
Now you're on.
I was just saying I wouldn't mind a blizzard. I like the snow.
Do you?
Oh
I can't agree with you on that one.
Well, start praying for a blizzard and see what happens.
After getting
Just-
sick
Just
from it
don't
last
tell
week, I'm
anybody.
like, yeah,
Just
no.
don't tell anybody you are.
Yeah, well, at this point, Dylan will know it was me, and he'll be angry. So maybe I'll.
We'll ask in campus discussion. Hey, by the way, did you pray for the weather this week?
Years
So-
ago, back in late 70s, I was teaching at Northwestern College in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. The school Billy Graham started, and I was a professor there. Went there right after finishing 4 years of, getting 2 master's degrees at Western. Master of Divinity, Master of Theology. Then I went to there, and I liked the school. I liked the students. But every single morning, there were snow plows and things out on the highways every single morning. And they gradually gave you a place you could go, use areas they have plowed out with all the ice and all the snow, in which you could work your way through the city and get to where you're going. And they had snow. If you were to go there and look if you walk outside of the campus, all white, except for certain places that there was melting, and you could see the row of the underground tunnels they had to move you on, And I did all this stuff, and I came home to my late wife, and I said, honey, God made this land for polar bears. We are intruders. I quit and I left and went back to Texas. So anyway, I guess we should get going again here. So let's, who's on here? If you are, please come on where I know who's here. Okay, Tyler, good to see you. Douglas is coming and Joshua, is that right?
Yes, sir. I'm here.
Be sure everybody's around.
Yep.
So far, we don't have Douglas. He's coming, I assume. All right. What I want to move to now is the Olivet Discourse. You've heard of that, right? Olivet Discourse. Jesus came out of the area of, and they don't have that anymore. I was going to try to think how to tell you this, but there was a way across the Kidron Valley because they had a bridge at one time. So that's many hundreds and thousands of years ago, probably. So I'm going to take you to this place in Matthew 24. And let me get over here to my study Bible. And be really easy to get. Matthew 24, there it is. Jesus went out from the temple and was going on his way. His disciples came to him to show him the buildings of the temple, but he answered them, you see all of these things, don't you? Most certainly I tell you, there will not be left one stone on another that will not be thrown down. Now let me stop there. We have to understand how to use the terms. The Temple Mount had didn't have obviously the Muslim mosque there, but you had what was called the Solomon's Temple. It was sort of built after that, and it looks a lot like if you go to Athens and look at the Stoa that goes across there, but near the Areopagus and the Acropolis, you'll see a building very similar to what I'm going to show you here. I'm going to show you some places, but let me just finish one little place here. He says, he said on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately saying, tell us, when will these things be? What is the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Okay. These are important questions, and these have a lot to do with prophecy. And so let me just look at some things here with you. One is, how may have the temple looked? Now, I hope you can see these. Let me just introduce my study Bible to you. There's never been anything like this ever done. I've already told you. The guy who analyzed this said, I've checked the top 100 on the internet. Not a single person has anything even close. And I have it moving pretty fast now. I'm trying to get it all finished. It's a lot of work. I did the Nelson Study Bible years ago and had 40 scholars paid for by Thomas Nelson, publishers. And we had 40 scholars, and it took us 8 years working on it with 40 scholars working on it and 3 editors. I'm largely doing this myself. It's a lot of work. So I'm trying to move as fast as I can, but we've got the New Testament virtually done. The Old Testament's being worked on pretty hard as much as we can. So I'm trying to give you visual look as well as I have videos. I also have photos. I have charts and maps. By the way, it works seamlessly with Accordance Bible software if you know how to use that. But then this translation I like too very well. So let me move over here and sort of show you what this looks like. This is if you want to work it here. Okay, if you want to see it here, these are tells you what the things are. Some of these are obvious, unless you get down here to things that, for example, application worship, passage studies, word studies. These are different kinds of things to provide information. So let me look at this with you real quick. Click that. See there. Can you see that? Yeah. Now I can make that far bigger by doing this. Just by clicking. So I'll show you this. Click. Here I'm on top of the Mount of Olives. And this is a place that Jesus would have come across right in there. So it gives you an idea about he would have come across the bridge to over the Mount of Olives from the temple. Now, this is not there, folks. I created this and put it in there. This is somewhat what it would look like. And so what you have is that this is the place that men could go, but women could not go. Women could come in here and on the side, but not inside here. This is where the altar would have been. This is the entrance to the temple, and through which you would go to the place, if you're the high priest once a year, the Holy of Holies. And they also put, actually in those days, we were told, ropes around the high priest's leg, one of them, just in case he's struck down by God for something wrong there, and pull him out. That's also where the temple veil would have been shriven in two, when Christ died. So there's a lot of interesting information here. I won't go into everything, but these right now are Muslim graves. These are all Muslim. Everything up on the Mount of Olives is Jewish. But now that we have some understanding of this, I will not go and explain all the places. But this is sort of how it would look like here from this angle. This is the Kidron Valley that goes all the way down to the Pool of Siloam. This is the northern portion through which the Romans broke through and finally conquered Jerusalem in AD 70. So it gives you some perspective on where things are. This is the Western Wall over here. What happened is that when the Romans came in, they did not destroy all the temple entirely. They pretty well destroyed the buildings like the temple, because they built a temple to here later on, not to God, but another temple. And then they had their other activities over here. Solomon's portico was destroyed. So the temple buildings doesn't mean they destroyed the walls and everything. They destroyed the top portion of the walls and threw them over, but not everything on the temple was destroyed. Okay, everybody with me there? Okay, let me get back to this. We'll go ahead and close that out. There we are. Now, where is stop? Hold on, it says sharing. That's what that is. About to stop sharing. Okay. Now, this is then what we say. They went to the Mount of Olives across from here, probably somewhere in this vicinity. Now, there weren't these graves there in those days. These are fairly, new over the last several hundred years. Now, he said on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be? What is the sign of your coming, of the end of the age?" You have two questions here. One is, what is the sign of the coming? How will we know you're coming? And the end of the age. And that refers to the question of the Messianic age. Remember, Jesus came to be Messiah, and that would be the beginning of the Messianic period they were anticipating. Now, they were not anticipating what Jesus was going to be doing. They had a totally different view of Messiah, like David and the king and armies and all this kind of stuff, but that's what they had. Jesus answered, "Be careful that no one leads you astray, for many will come in my name, saying, I am the," and drop the word Christ here for our purposes, because this is just simply a word made from the Greek. The Greek word is Christos. The Greek word Christos here means one who's anointed. The Jews would have understood Mashiach, which means the anointed one. So we've taken a word that means something and made it into a name. But that's okay. I'm not saying you can't use Christ, but I'm saying that's the sort of thing that happens sometimes that takes away the understanding sometimes of how words are used. This occurs in 2 Thessalonians 2, when I wrote an article recently, and I actually spoke at a conference on the question of whether the rapture is in there, and I'll talk about that when we get to it. So, I am the Messiah, will lead you astray. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. That goes on quite a bit. See that you aren't troubled, for all this just happened, but the end is not yet. The end of the age. For nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be famines and plagues and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Now, I could read on down here. It goes into the abomination of desolation, talks about what Daniel talked about in Daniel 7, If you go back and read there, the holy place, what occurs, the fleeing into the mountains, probably over to a place like Pella, across into Jordan, most likely. So you have all these kinds of things that he's answering your question. They ask, when will all these things happen regarding the destruction of the Jerusalem, and when will all these things happen in regard to you coming back? And Jesus said, you're going to have these things and these things and these things. We're talking about many hundreds of years, probably, because you have people that have claimed to be Messiah over the centuries, different people. And so that's an important question. If they say, here is the Messiah, don't pay attention to it. False Christs and false prophets will arise. When are all these things going to occur becomes the issue. And that what happens as you read through this very lengthy statement about the coming of the Son of Man, the issue is he talking about the exact same event here? Is there a thing we call the rapture, or is there just simply a second coming of Christ to the earth? If we have the rapture, what does that mean? You have people that are taken up to be with Jesus and the marriage supper of the Lamb and all those things. But if not, is he just coming back to rule? And are both true? And I would say both are true, and they're separated, because this entire statement here includes more than one element of what all is going to occur. There's things about here like the abomination of desolation that's talked about in the book of Revelation, which is different from discussing the fact of Christ coming back in the sense of his coming per se. The abomination of desolation is talked about in Revelation as something that's in a tribulation period. So there's a question of how you take all this and work it through. That's what I'm getting at. So we're going to take a look then. I'll get out of this. Just close this down here. Come back to this later, because I want to show you some other stuff here in this materials. Just to give you just a little bit more insight, I want to show you the, I've already showed the Temple Mount, how it may have looked. I could show you what it does look like today. It has that thing up there, which is not the temple, obviously. But this is pretty good as a work, as to show you would be Solomon's portico. This would have been how the temple would have looked, fairly good size. The western wall area, which that had the walls were knocked down quite a bit, but not entirely. In other words, basically the wall was destroyed by the Romans, this portion right in here, and not all of this down here. This was destroyed by the Romans, this a walkway that led up into the Temple Mount and Solomon's portico. And this over here is the opening that would have gone into underneath and up and to get into the temple if you were coming from the southern portion of the city. By the way, there were also out here mikveh, that is what we would call baptismal pools that people use. That's why on the day of Pentecost, Peter and them were probably here. And this is the place they had people learning. They had rooms for teaching. Peter was likely in there with the apostles until the Spirit came and things happened. And then you had thousands of people out here who were attracted to the sound that was made. Remember in Acts 2, the sound that was made, and then the wind. And of course, then they saw tongues of fire. All that occurred in this area right here. And then when they baptized 3,000, they had 31 mikveh they found, 31 in the southern portion of the Temple Mount. So if you had 12 disciples, the apostles, 12 disciples baptizing 3,000 people, you could do it in a day. Because the way they did it, they didn't have a big ceremony like we do. They would go through the mikveh. They probably had a group going through like that, one after the other with 12 guys doing it. You could actually accomplish it. So I just thought you might want to see this to understand sort of how things were. The temple would have been destroyed by the Romans. Some of the upper wall would have been destroyed. This would have been destroyed. And that's what Jesus is talking about. And the disciples say, aren't these wonderful buildings? Jesus said, well, they're all going to be destroyed. So any questions at that point? I thought it helped to get a perspective by looking at this.
Okay, maybe I'll come back to this Matthew 24, but my biggest issue whenever interpreting this passage has always been, what's the word?
What is it?
Discerning where he goes from talking to the disciples to this being a future event, because I don't want to go full preterist here, because then that sounds too much like liberalism, where it's just like, oh well, this is just first century events read back into it. Obviously, I don't believe that, but I also want to acknowledge, like, he seems to be talking to them personally in a way. So that's why a lot of people believe that at least some of this was referring to stuff that happened in the first century. So I don't know if you're going to get back.
I think what you see here partially is that different aspects. He said, "Say, Lord, when will these things be? What? The destruction of the temple buildings and the end of the age." Well, think what you've got to deal with. You got a 70 A.D. and then here we are 2,000 years later. So the point of it is, the destruction of the temple buildings has happened very readily. What has happened since has been going on until the end of the age has not occurred. So there's more things to occur. So Jesus, when he develops the sermon, when he deals with this instruction to the disciples, he covers a whole long period of time. It's not just one thing. So we'll see how that works in just a minute. Let me just show you this. That's another picture I came across I thought was interesting out of Madrid, Spain. Looking at the disciples were up there looking down at this building thinking, oh boy, we really like that. I hope they keep it. We find that in Luke discusses the destruction of the 70 AD temple buildings. No other apostle does. Okay, but Luke is later as a non-apostle, isn't he? He wrote the Gospel of Luke. He wasn't an apostle. The Gospel of Luke is done by someone who wasn't a person there. Okay? He would have talked to somebody who was a person there. But he decided to talk about the destruction in AD 70, whereas the other apostles who actually were there, actually when they write their volumes, like a Matthew or a Mark or someone like that, they would have talked about other matters, apparently. Let's see, what is this? Just to be clear. Okay, that I just showed you that. So anything else here to give you? No, I think that's probably adequate. Okay, let's keep moving through this then. You understand the difference? There's a mixture of periods of time from the time of Christ till now, that some of these things he talks about still have to happen. Over the centuries, people have declared themselves to be Messiah. Okay? And so you have this goes all these 2,000 years with the events occurring that he just talks about, but also certain things are going to occur, and he's going to put that in what's talked about in Revelation, like in chapters 6 and 7 and those areas. You know, the first couple, 2-3 chapters are about the contemporary scene in Asia Minor, and then he begins to move into things that are coming. All right. So I could put this on, let you just listen to me talk. This is one of my videos.
Behind me, you will see the Temple Mount. I'm standing on the Mount of Olives that overlooks it. In between me and the Mount of Olives is known as the Kidron Valley. And we have 3 large valleys in this area, the major 2 being the Kidron and on the other side, the Hinnom. But this particular location where I'm standing may be close to the place in which Jesus and his disciples talked about a very important theme.
And I'll not talk there. I'll continue teaching. But if you ever want to watch those things, you're welcome to. Now, so we're going to see that, listen to some of the terminology here. He says, okay, nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, famines, plagues, earthquakes. All these things are the beginning of birth pains. Now, we don't know exactly when these started, or maybe even if they have, but probably have. Then they will deliver you up to oppression and will kill you. You'll be hated by all the nations for my name's sake. Then many will stumble, deliver up another, will hate one another. Many false prophets will arise and lead many astray, because iniquity will be multiplied, the love of many will grow cold. But he who endures unto the end of what? You have to decide that, will be saved. The good news of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world for testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. So let me ask, you're looking at this kind of statement, you're thinking, what's that's talking about? I mean, if we get to every country, will then Jesus come and the end to take place? And so that's what you have to think through here on this kind of question. You with me? So this could be talking about the end that's still coming, or maybe an earlier period it would have occurred, because God may actually have it worked out with when everybody has been notified, so to speak. Then if any man tells you, behold, here is the Messiah, there, don't believe it. For false messiahs and false prophets will arise. They'll show great wonders and signs and lead astray, if possible, even the chosen ones. That's believers. Behold, I have told you beforehand. If therefore they tell you, behold, he's in the wilderness, don't go out. He's in the inner room. Don't believe it. For as the lightning flashes from the east and is seen even to the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For wherever the carcass is, there will the vultures will gather together. And then he goes on and talks about the various signs and the events, the Son of Man appearing in the skies. They'll see him coming in power and great glory. Read, it's chapter 10, I think, of Mark, where you have the high priest who's interrogating Jesus and trying to get him to make comments. And Jesus says to him, when he says, are you the Messiah or not, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus says, what you say is true, or something like that. And then he says, and you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. So that's what this is probably talking about. But that's also what was talked about in Daniel 7, where the Son of Man comes to the Ancient of Days, and to him was given power and glory and so forth. That passage is the one that Jesus refers to when he's talking to the high priest. So we have this kind of scenario here, and that becomes part of the issue when you realize that so many things here seem to be bits and pieces of the things that will occur. Because some of these issues right here are talked about in the book of Revelation with John. All right. Now, let me say something about Luke, because with Luke, we got a problem, because Luke does mention, as I said, Luke mentions the destruction of the temple apparently in AD 70. He would have been alive then. He was doing things with Paul at that time. And finally, he actually becomes aware of the destruction of Jerusalem. So he seems to talk about what Jesus did at the earlier portion, but the rest of it seems to refer to something that happens in a later period of the abomination of desolation, the tribulation, and all those kind of events. So this passage cannot be tied to, let's say, see, a lot of people would. They'd tie the whole thing to AD 70. But I don't think that can be done. I think you have a division that's occurred here. Anybody have any comments on that before we move on?
Okay, where do you believe that Luke refers to the destruction of Jerusalem?
Okay, give me the passage. I don't remember Luke.
Okay, because
what passage? Chapter?
Luke 21 is where is his
Yeah, I just want
his
to
account
know
of the
exactly.
okay,
Okay, I'm there. I'm there now.
Yeah.
And so, let me get to Luke. Nation rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, terrors, all these kinds of things. So when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know that its desolation is at hand. Then those who are in Judea flew to the mountains, which became Pella, where people did, by the way. When the Romans came, many people who believed this material left Jerusalem and went to Pella over in Jordan. Let those who are in the middle of her, let's see, those who are in the middle of her depart, and let those who are in the country not enter in. These are the days of vengeance, that all things would not written be fulfilled. What are those who are pregnant, those who are nursed infants, be in great distress? It's viewed that this probably is much more specific and going to destruction of Jerusalem. I'm just telling you, that's what most people think. If you can argue differently, it's fine.
Yeah.
But
So like I take the stance that it was that it had to have been removed before, because it's a long story, but basically because I believe Luke was such a painstaking, accurate historian in Acts, and gives every reason to believe that he really was an eyewitness. So, and that he doesn't mention in Acts Peter and Paul's death or a ton of the major things that happened after 64 AD. So therefore, Acts basically had to have been written before then, and if Acts was, then so was Luke. I don't know. That's the stance I take.
it seems okay to me to do that, because remember, it appears that this story, is not the right word, this narrative Jesus is following includes the destruction of all the buildings on top of the temple. I mean, that was the first question. The question wasn't the end of the world. The question was, when will these buildings be destroyed? And he says, it's going to be destroyed, fairly soon when it comes, and so it did. Those buildings were destroyed on top of the Temple Mount. So it seems that some of it refers to what is near, and some of it seems to be what is far. Because you can clearly find things that are talked about in the Revelation of John that refer to what we see in Matthew 24. So it seems to be an extension, is what I'm saying. Now, you can think on that and decide whether you agree or not, but that seems to be a reasonable interpretation. Now, let's keep moving. I've already mentioned here it's found in these particular passages, Mark 13, Matthew 24. You notice it nothing with John. At this point, John is writing on other things, but he did write on the Revelation, which seems to be referred to in here. Okay. Now, so this is why I think some is the tribulation, some is the second coming. There's a sheep and goat judgment when God judges at the end. Remember, how did you treat my people? Remember that when he leave from me, depart into whatever said, what he says, those who, let's see if I can bring this out. There is in the teachings in the New Testament, the fact of Jesus regarding individuals who are sheep and goats. And these sheep and goats are either good or bad, obviously, and it's how you treated them. We're not talking about real sheep and real goats. We're talking about whether people treated God's people in a certain way. And so we have that kind of discussion later on. That's a sheep and goat judgment. So on the Mount of Olives, he seems to say a lot of things. I just listed a bunch of stuff today when I was looking through some of this. Prophetic judgment in Matthew, and here you have conditions that occur in reference to the temple, and then the issue of the disciples. Here, where is it? There it is. Admonition to believers. Now, what is the difference between the sheep and goat judgment, as Jesus talks about, and the admonition to believers? Remember reading this? You have a situation where individuals, according to how they treated the people of God, will be judged accordingly. Whereas believers, if they have been as they should be, then they will actually receive rewards. Now, the setting of the Olive Discord, I've put it down here. I'm not going to go into this. I've already sort of talked about these things. I just kept them here. This is the Luke one I was mentioning. I was trying to go through and find all these ones to look at. What will be the sign of your coming in the end of the age? And that's what he's gone through, spent a whole passage of scripture about. and then the end of the age. So there is an end that it comes to. Okay. Now, an overview of future events. Here we go. There's a church age. That's what we're in right now. There will be, at least if I'm correct, and this is what Calvary believes, I know, is that the rapture occurs at some indeterminate time, and we won't know about it exactly until it happens. I mean, if it occurs before this session's out, then everything else afterwards begins to play out. In other words, this is something that has to occur for the remainder to continue. Okay. Rapture is, and I'm going to take next time a whole thing on the rapture and go and show you stuff that maybe you've probably never seen before. But this is just a general overview. I want to get into some things that are specific. But you have here the rapture, then the judgment seat of Christ. That's where Jesus says, well done or not. Well, not saying well done doesn't mean you don't get to go to heaven. He's talking about crowns at this point. Some people don't like that idea. You mean somebody gets something I don't? Even that statement indicates that you need some help because you have jealousy and so forth. Read the end of Paul with Second Timothy. He talks about there is a crown of life that we're running to win, and he hopes to receive it. In the Greek games, by the way, you might have had 20 cities represented in the games where they ran. And Paul talks about it, Hebrews talks about it also. Only one person received the prize. There was no second place, third place, fourth place, fifth place. Person showed up for the mat and whatever. The fact is, there's a single prize. But the thing is that we are running against ourselves, not somebody else. See, so that's what Paul develops if you go read 2 Timothy. So what you find here is that there's going to be a time of judgment in which we will either receive something, we won't. But you're saved by grace through faith, not by what you do. What you do gets you a crown of life or a crown of whatever he's giving. But if some people go in basically without anything, except they make it into heaven. Because heaven's a gift. It's an act of grace. It's not an act of works. But your reward becomes an act of works. You understand that? The New Testament does that. It indicates the fact that some people get something and some people don't. It depends on how they act. I had a guy got real aggravated at me about a sermon I preached on this. You guys are doing okay, but he did not like the fact that I thought not all Christians are going to get everything. I said, I'm sorry, it doesn't say that. So according to how we act before God, it's going to have a lot to do with how we are able to enjoy things, apparently. Anyway, then you have the church raptured first. There's a judgment seat, all the tribulation period. The 666 stands for the man of sin that's going to be in the temple. Apparently, you're going to have a temple built. And then you're going to have a second coming and the millennium. Then you have the new heavens and new earth. That's what basically the layout is here. Luke talks about until the time of the Gentiles be fulfilled in Luke. And so it may be, and I'm not dogmatic again, that he's more focused here than the rest of them are, and then also the church age. So you do have some of the same things in Luke, but not everything the same. Now, here's a parallel between the Olivet Discourse. Now, I thought you might want to enjoy, looking at this and keeping records if you want. There are parallels between the Olivet Discourse and the sealed judgments of Revelation. Do you know what I mean by the sealed judgments of Revelation? You ever read Revelation? Okay, one of them is that you have seals that are broken open and sort of evaluates, is what you have. Somebody wrote you a letter, you get to open it up and look at it. So we find out that there are false messiahs and false prophets, there are wars and All these kind of things will occur, and as part of God's judgment. Now, the judgment of God largely starts. I wrote an article on this recently, and you're welcome to read it if you want. But by the way, I don't know if I mentioned to you. Have any of you gone to my website yet? Not that you had to. Okay, Douglas. I have a pretty decent website. The guy I'm having to do has done a really good job, and I'm continuing to add. But I have about 150 articles I've written in so far, and I have about 100 there, I think. So I cover a lot of different topics. So if you have interest, you can download those and keep them and read them. So I just want you to know it's there if you want to go to it. But you go to hwhouse.com to get the website open, hwhouse.com. And that opens up lots of videos on archaeology, probably 15 or 20 of those. And I've got a bunch of things on theology that you can look at. And then I have books that I've got if you have interest in that, and also articles. There's also a thing on there we're trying to help people in other countries right now who need more access to the Word of God, and we're trying to do donations for that, but there's nothing required on that. Just let you know that's on there. And so that's what the website's doing if you want to go to it, hwhouse.com. Now, having said that, you can see the various kinds of viewpoints that are being argued here between Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Revelation. There are parallels between them, but what you find is that an article that I wrote, it's in a book done by Joseph Holden, you know that name at all? If I don't know if you do, but anyway, I wrote a chapter in his book on chapter 6 and 7, which is the beginning of the coming of the basic judgments of God upon the earth. And there you start with the horsemen, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And then you start having all these judgments of various sorts. So you may want to check those out. Now, I'm not going to go to this question, I don't think. Let me just say, I have that statement I said before that, you have some things that are similar, but they're not the same. Do you understand that? For example, God and I both think, but I don't think like God. I mean, I'm not God. You can find similarities between people. I'm a 5'8.5", and if you are too, but what about a guy who's 6? In other words, we're similar, but we're not the same. You understand the concepts? A cow and a dog are similar. They have tails, ears, they have fur, and so in their paws, and they have different things like that, not feet that we think of. There are similarities, but the question is the dissimilarities. And a lot of people don't understand that in reading scripture, that you see some things that are similar, but they're not talking about exactly the same. So that's all this is teaching. You have trees and a bush, they are similar, but a trunk, for example, distinguishes them, even though they share the others. So that's just an interpretive thing I was going to make out. That becomes important when you start reading the scriptures for interpretation. Now, distinguishing the revelation of Christ then from the rescue by Christ. And I wanted you to sort of look at this and think with me. Now we're getting to some pretty good stuff I'm looking forward to talking about. I had to talk about the other, but the traits of the revelation, the coming of Christ, physical, right? Physical. He's going to come in the clouds with thousands of angels. He's going to set his feet down. And by the way, the Jews, according to one of the books of the Bible, I think it's Zechariah, says they'll look on the one whom they pierced, and the nation will be born in a day. That is, they will recognize what they have done, and they will embrace him as Messiah. And so you have things like that. You have coming in the clouds, the coming of Christ. Angels are present in both, gathering the elect in both, messianic mission. So there's sort of a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of dissimilarities. And that's what we have to pay attention to so as we don't get these confused. In other words, when we talk about the second coming, we could be talking about the rapture, where he comes in the clouds and we're caught up together with him. or it could be the second coming where he comes with angels and comes to the earth. And he's coming in both ways, but they're not the same event. Okay? You got that, Tyler?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good to hear. So I miss seeing your purity face. All righty. So distinguishing the revelation of Christ from the rescue, that's the point I'm trying to make here. Now, if you want to look at these things, I go into various passages and look at the difference between Thessalonians and Matthew 24, because they talk similarly, but they're not discussing the same event. You get the point? I'm taking the time to talk about the bush and the tree and all these things. People say, well, this must be then, there's no rapture. This is a second coming where he comes to earth. I'm saying, no. Tell me what's similar. Tell me what's different. Because you'll find they're not the same event, because they have some components that are not consistent with one another. Jolie, do you understand what I mean by that? Why don't you explain it back to me?
No, I'm trying to understand it.
Okay. So if I look at a tree and I look at a bush, what is similar?
Yeah, I get that there like are similar traits, but they aren't the same.
They have some things that are different so that they're not the same. If they had consistent similar traits and nothing else, then they would be the same thing. But since one is similar, one is different. See? And so that's what we have to do in interpretation. That's why I'm saying in this issue, do you believe in a rapture or a second coming? Well, it says a second coming. It's the same event. No, it's not, because they do different things. They occur different ways. They are not discussed in the same way. So we can say that there is two events in which Christ comes. Does that make sense with you, though?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Because there's several components. You don't have to have every component, but if you have a few components, you can say clearly that yes, they have some of the same stuff, but they're not the same thing. They're not the same event. They're not the same person or whatever. Okay. So that's important. A response to disciples questioning about the destruction of the temple is coming at the end of the age, whereas Paul addresses concerns by Thessalonian believers. And that's what you're going to see when you go to the issue of Paul, because in 1 Thessalonians, every single chapter deals with the statement of the rapture. Every single chapter. He delivers us, 110. He delivers us from the wrath to come, 110. And so each chapter tackles the question of what God is doing in the coming that he's doing. It's not the second coming, it's the rapture that's coming. And so we'll talk about that some more in a little bit later. So if you look at this, by the way, you realize that this class is always taped, videoed, and you as a student can go and look at things and see things. So if you want to take some time, for example, to run through this might prove of value, specifically since I'm going to show you something else in a few minutes, and you won't have time to copy it down, but you can take time to watch it and write it down if you want. Okay? We're going to see some clear things between the rapture and the second coming in a few minutes that I've gotten here. I have a talk I've done here. Is application different from the meaning of the text? The meaning and the application of the meaning can be quite different. Now, here's an issue a lot of people are aware of. Anybody been to the Middle East? Anybody? Israel, no place? Okay. Well, you wouldn't have seen this, but in various areas, specifically in Arab areas, they have a practice that they follow that we're going to see is it will open up a passage to you of Scripture. So we're going to get to it in just a moment between John 15 and 1 Thessalonians 4. So if you have a Bible, it'll probably be good to look at it. because we're going to study the passage here. Why did I say John 15? I think it's 14. I don't know why I did that. Maybe it's just wrong. Anyway, I think it's John 14. I can check it real quick to be sure. Oh, yes, it is John 14. I think that's a mistake. You just type in 14 instead of 15. I want to show you something. Don't let your heart be troubled. He's talking to his disciples. Now, why is their heart troubled?
Because they know he's going away soon.
They know he's going away soon, yes. Don't let your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many, and this is not a correct translation, but it's better than the one that says, in my Father's house are many mansions. It's amazing how many people sing about having mansions. They're thinking, I may be living in a small place here, but boy, when I get to heaven, it's going to be gigantic. Well, I don't, maybe it will be, but the word mansion is a Latin word that was used by the translators of the King James translation when they were working on this to translate it with transliteration, not translation. This word in Latin and also the word in Greek means a room, and you'll see that in just a moment. Okay? So he said, let's see. My Father's house are many rooms, would be the proper translation. If it weren't so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And you'll see what this means in a moment. If I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you'll be also. You know where I go and you know the way. Said, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we know the way? He says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you had known me, you have known my Father also. From now on, you know him and have seen him. That's an interesting statement. You've seen him. I think the reason why he says you've seen him, because he and the Father are one. Not one person, but they're the same deity. You have three persons in one God. When we say God, we're talking about any one of the persons in reference to the nature that they have. See? So we can say of Jesus, he's God and man, because he shares the entirety of the nature of the divine being. But he's different in reference to he's not all of them are not the same person. That's important as Christian thinking. And then you have this is show us the Father, and that'll be enough for us. He says, if I've been with you for such a long time and you don't know me, who has seen me has seen the Father. How do you say, show us the Father? Don't you believe I am in the Father is in me? See that? He's trying to help them to understand a little bit about that Father, Son, and Holy Spirit share the exact same being. That is, everything you can say about one in reference to what it means to be God can be said to the other. But they are distinct as to their persons. The persons are not each other, but the persons share the entirety of the deity. Are you with me? This is early Trinitarian teaching Jesus is giving. Okay. So he goes through there. Let's look then at something I have here for you on this. Oh, I know. I want to show you this first. Here it is. Okay. See this? I took a picture of this while I was over there one day to let people be sure they understood. The way they do it in the Arab community in the other world, and also as that relates to the passage, is that when in the ancient world and also even now and in this kind of Middle Eastern community, when you're going to get married, you say you finally made a deal and you're going to get married to the certain woman. Now, what do? First thing you do, you go back and start working on a room and these are not small, working on a room in the Father's house, because you're going to go, when it's finished, you're going to go and find that woman and marry her. They're going to have a marriage supper, a special event. And then you're going to take that woman back to the Father's house that you've built before you get, when you got it all done, you could go get married. So you bring her back and you live in the Father's house. You understand? This is what they're doing right here. There's probably maybe 2 or 3 sons or whatever living in this building of the fathers with their wife. So what does Jesus do? He says, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go away, and there's several rooms that I'm building, and when I'll come and I'll bring you back to the Father's house, just like this practice in the Middle East. Does that make sense to you? And this is a real example. There's going to be, right now, this is several years back, but this right here probably is lived in by 2 or 3 sons, or 2 or whatever, and their wives and children. They tend to live together. We don't do much of that, but that's how they do it. Does that make sense to you now? Help a little bit? Okay. So there's that. Now, if we work on down here a little bit more, I think I can show it all to you here. That's the marriage practices. Here's what I want to do here. There's the one. Look at this. This is very fascinating. I want you to get your Bible open and turn to John 14. And I want you to get your Bible turned also to 1 Thessalonians 4. So we're going to look at John 14 and 1 Thessalonians 4. This is going to be very enlightening to you. 1 Thessalonians is clearly talking about a rapture of Christ coming for his church. Okay? Now, if you look then in John 14, it says, don't be troubled, right? You got your finger at both places? It says in John 14, don't be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me, right? In 1 Thessalonians, verse 13, it says about those who grieve. Don't be like people who grieve in the world. Why? Because it's good. You're going to go to the Father's house. That's the point. It's talking about the rapture. So it says, don't grieve in 1 Thessalonians. It says, don't be troubled in John 14. Go to the next one. Believe in God. John 14. 1 Thessalonians 14 says about believing. You believe. Third one down. You believe in God, believe also in me. Jesus speaks about Jesus and God in John 4 and 1 Thessalonians 14. Told you, come again, receive you. Same thing as being called up to myself to meet the Lord. Be where I am, I'll be always with the Lord. Can you see that the same exact concept is being taught between John 14 and 1 Thessalonians 4? When I came across this and looked at it, I thought this is really an important statement, because Jesus says, don't worry about it. I'm going away, but when I get everything ready, I'll be coming back to get the church. And that's exactly what Paul teaches in 1 Thessalonians. Okay? This is what I mean by the rapture, see? Okay, let's go on. What's that now? Now, I'm not going to do them right now. Don't worry about it. But these are the rapture passages, and these are the second coming passages. And if you were to take the time to read them, you would see there clearly is a difference between a second coming of Christ when he comes to the earth, and he comes to the earth with his angels and with the church. And the issue of the rapture, he's coming in the sky, and we're going to him, not him down to us. So during this period, the rapture occurs. If you'll notice how it's written, done here, look here. She's coming down and going back up. He doesn't come to the earth. He comes down, the church meets him in the air and goes to be with him. In the second advent, Christ comes with the church and comes to the earth. Quite a different thing. He's not married here and he's married here. All right. Any questions? See, we have still 20 minutes left. Anybody else around? I only see 4 people, including me. Okay. Now, parallels between the Olivet Discourse and the Seal of Judgments. If you go and compare the idea of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, see, we have the Olivet Discourse we've been talking about. And all these components, it's important to see the distinction and also the similarity. Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke, they speak about some of the same things. Some things seem to have reference to a rapture later, but the others seem to fit Revelation 6. I told you I did that paper on Revelation 6 and 7. So you find then in both the Olivet Discourse and the book of Revelation, false messiahs, wars, international discord, famines, pestilences, persecution, and earthquakes. All those things are consistent with these things. So you have to read the Olivet Discourse in connection with the book of Revelation, and you have to read a statement in John in reference to the fact of the rapture, clearly distinguishing the ideas. Done that one? Done. Oh, that was doubled. I don't need that anymore. I'm not going to say a whole lot about this. What we have here is the history of the church. And just pay attention to this. There's just a little bit to learn. The ancient church, up until about, and the dates are not always it's something everybody agrees with. They may differ on different dates. But around 600, we moved from the ancient church to the medieval church when a lot of things begin to happen. See, in this period over here, we have people like Polycarp. We have people like I'm trying to think some of the Augustine, maybe people like that. Some writing in Latin Bibles. You've got any number of different kinds of people that are building things during this period. But around here, around 600, the church begins to take a nosedive. This is when you have the Muslims coming in. You have eventually Constantinople taken over by Islam. This is when you had problems between the Roman Church and the Eastern Greek Church. Lots of things are going on here that are problematic. But before this is finished, it begins to go upward to the time of the Reformation and starts moving upward. So about this time around 1500, you then, 700 years later, you begin to have a Reformation to occur, and it goes for some time, and now you have the modern church. Have you noticed there's a lot of things in some churches today that really have very little to do with biblical teaching or even biblical stances on viewpoints? I mean, you've got guys in the pulpit today they just see themselves as psychologists or something, and they get up and tell people how they can be happier. They'll be happier if they get in the will of God. That'll be happier. But also trying to make money. And then you have guys like Andy Stanley, you know that name, whose dad was a great preacher. I preached in his church once. But Charles Stanley was his name. Andy Stanley has gone into everything imaginable in what the world's arguing now. You name the vice, he's for it. So it's really a tragic situation. The modern church is in decline. Hopefully there'll be a revival. That would be a good thing. But that's the history of the church. Now, I don't know when Christ is coming. I haven't got a clue. But I do know that when he comes, He'll be taking all of us who have believed in him. There's no works required to be a Christian, although that will have something to do with your life and also your probably rewards later on. So this is just another show like the other one. 600, about 950, it begins to start moving up, but it's not there. It occurs around 1500 is when finally things get straight. Trying to think of anything else I want to cover there. I can't think of it. Let me see if you have some questions. I've covered a lot of stuff, and we're going to start moving in more into discussion of the scripture and some of those things, and talk about biblical viewpoints. Now, there are different. You'll need to learn. Do you already know this? I don't know what they teach at Calvary as such in this, other than what I'm teaching. You know what a difference is of pre-trib and mid-trib and post-trib, the difference between a premillennialist and a postmillennialist. I hope you know these things. Difference between certain different views on what occurs during the tribulation period. There's all sorts of views on those things there. And so I'll need to talk about those as part of a class on eschatology. But on the other hand, I sort of need to get an idea of where you are in your training. Do they have other classes that go into this, or you just came to the school and held the views?
I haven't learned a whole lot on it. I feel like most of my understanding has been from the reading for this class.
Okay. So you
We've
are
gone
reading
into
those
a base
books.
level in other classes.
They do what?
We've gone into it at a base level in other classes.
Okay. So some classes talk about it, but you at least are getting it reading the books. Now, we're going to be going into stuff somewhat like a lot of things you have in your books pretty soon. In this class, we have 3 more times. So we're going to tackle 3 different areas of study that you should have read on, and we'll do some quizzing and to see about where you are. More class interaction will be good. But it's sort of hard, I know, in this kind of situation. I'm up here talking, and I'm not in a classroom. And so just trying to get you to think about issues, see some distinctions. I hope you've seen that, for example, in the Olivet Discourse. A lot of people read those, and one guy says it's all about the rapture. Another person said, no, this is all about the second coming and the tribulation. And what I've tried to show you is, no, it's talking about both, because there's something going to happen at what time? In AD 70 for all these guys, right? When are all these things going to be destroyed, Jesus? What did I say? When the Romans come. But after that, all these other things like people claiming to be Messiah, all these kinds of things have been going on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. It's not just then, it's now. And you're going to find probably more people declare themselves that as we move closer, because remember, this is what the man of sin, the guy who sits in the temple that will have to be built apparently, and who declares himself to be God. Now, I don't plan to be here to see that, if I'm understanding the correct, but some people will. So we need to be aware of what's there. Any questions for me? I talk a lot, but I don't like to have to. I like for you to have interaction and to ask questions and such. Anybody about to go to sleep? Anything going on special in your life right now? Jody, I see you talking to someone there a lot. Are you married?
Yeah. My husband's studying for his architecture licensing exam, so he was up here in the office with me.
Okay, that's good. Oh, that's cool. Architecture, huh? That's probably a good area. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good to hear. Okay, Douglas, anything?
I'm horrible at technology. My mouse stopped working at the beginning of this. Then I couldn't figure out how to unmute myself half the time.
Well,
I finally figured out how to pull the Teams up on my computer, so I'm not just doing it on my phone now.
well, I can understand that. I have, like I said at the very beginning, I thought, did I do this right? I thought I did, but it didn't look right to me, and I couldn't figure out what's going on. I clicked the right button here, I did this, and I look, and it didn't look the same, and I thought I made a mistake.
Well, I
And
did want to
so
ask you. You said you're around Houston.
I live about an hour north of Houston.
Okay,
Where are you?
Missouri.
Missouri, yeah. I like Missouri. It's a nice place.
Yeah, it's really nice today. It's like
Yeah,
72.
72. And Dylan, you talk. You've had a number of things to say. Anything in particular?
I mean, if you want some good news, we had a new person come to the Bible study last week.
Okay.
Said she really enjoyed it. Going through Proverbs. Hoping she can learn a lot.
Okay. Now I've lost a couple other people. Let's see. I've lost where are they going? Let's see. Looks like I have Damon's gone. Are you still there, Damon? All righty. Well, lost two or three of you. So I hope that you will just keep your reading. But listen, one thing you need to do if you're reading, if you don't understand something, let's talk about it. And so please feel free to do that because we want to be sure you finish the class with understanding of the area. But the classes we're going, I think, as you're going to see, is, we're going to, you can't see it here, but I've got an entire set of things coming that I've already prepared for the next week that we're going to start working through some of the issues of the different viewpoints of millennialism and the viewpoints of pre-trib versus post-trib. We're going to look at those things more in detail and be talking about scripture passages about it. So be prepared to do that. You should be able to get that in your reading. All right. Well, I tell you what, we'll let it go tonight and let you get some sleep or talk or whatever you want to do. But please do the reading because I need you to be on top of what we're going to move to. Okay? So I don't know if there's a penalty for stopping the class earlier or not. But I don't
Dylan's
really.
gonna pay my penalty.
Huh? What?
Dylan's gonna pay my penalty.
Oh, okay.
Whatever it is.
I'm your scapegoat for the night.
That's right.
Did you watch the Super Bowl today?
No.
Nobody?
I watched like the second and third quarters.
I was over at some people's house that are very, very close to me. Living wise. I mean, not where they're located, but our relationship. And to the boy's birthday. And so we went there and celebrated the birthday. Then we sat down on the couch and started watching the game. I have never seen a football game that was as crazy as this thing was. That the ones who win initially, I thought the whole thing was going to be based on four field goals they did, and the other team had nothing. And I'm thinking, what a game is this? They just keep bouncing back and forth and kicking it was, I've never seen one like it. So that was interesting. Well, God's blessings on you. I wish you, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Be on top of this because we're going to be, looking at scripture and talking, and I'm probably going to quiz you a little bit on stuff. Okay. All right. You be good. Bye bye. Can you find your way off?